Hello, and welcome to episode 204 of Dark and Stormy Book Club. Today we visit with Meredith Jaeger, the author of The Pilot's Daughter. Enjoy!
I'm Ann Dark.
I'm Tracy Stormy.
And I'm Kathy Knight.
And together we are
It Was a Dark and Stormy Book Club,
a podcast for mystery lovers.
Welcome.
If you enjoy our show, please consider contributing to the Dark and Stormy Patreon. By becoming a patron, you will help us create better and quality content. There are also benefits to becoming a patron, such as exclusive content and Dark and Stormy merchandise. Become a supporter at patreon.com/darkandstormybc. Check our website for the link. We appreciate any and all contributions. Thank you. We would like to welcome to the program Meredith Jaeger. She's the author of The Pilot's Daughter. Welcome, Meredith.
Thank you so much.
I really enjoyed this book quite a bit. I know you had a lot of information in there about the actual murder mystery, but what made you think of this concept for your story?
That's a great question. I'm really excited to be on your podcast because you like the genres of suspense and thriller and mystery. So I had been reading, in addition to a lot of historical fiction, some domestic suspense, which I really enjoy. And I liked the concept in the book, The Next Mrs. Parrish by Liv Constantine. There's a character who's a social climber who's sort of hiding her past and has reinvented herself. And so I knew I wanted a story in the 20s. I knew I wanted it to be a mystery. My inspiration, I'd read The Last Mrs. Parrish, and I liked the idea of this woman who had reinvented herself because she wanted more money, more status, more power. And when I read about the Dot King scandal, she was found murdered in her apartment and had $15,000 worth of furs and jewels stolen. And then it was a case with multiple suspects because of these different men she was dating. And then the more I learned about her, I found out she was born to poor Irish immigrants in Harlem and had essentially given herself a new name, gotten divorced, and was seen as a flapper and a social climber. They called her the Broadway Butterfly because she would flit from one nightclub to another. So I thought, I love reading these domestic thrillers, and I wanted to bring an element of that to historical fiction while still keeping it historically accurate. So that's where I got the inspiration for the 20s story.
Well, I was born in the 40s. Your book brought back some memories of my first jobs, where the woman had to be dressed up and had to have your makeup done, all the treatment that men gave women back then that was not very chivalrous, shall we say.
Right, yeah.
The way that her fiance treated her.
Yeah, there was just this idea that women were supposed to be the perfect homemakers. House has to be kept in perfect order. They should care for the children, have a full face of makeup on, dinner on the table, be an excellent cook. And just reading these old advertisements, which are so sexist, really set the tone where, all the cleaning products, of course, are marketed towards women. It was just really this idea in the media that you're subservient to your husband and like your one role is just to make sure he's comfortable while looking beautiful and not complaining.
I saw some advice that was written for ladies of that time period. Don't bring your husband any problems when he goes through the door. Always have a smiling face. And I'm like, oh my goodness.
It's so true.
Reading it from our vision today, these men are crazy.
Yeah.
But the thing is, Ellie's mother was the same.
Yes.
You have to be there for your husband.
She was from that older generation, and it was a true generational divide where she said, your job is to get married and marry well. Don't think about working. That's not what you need to do. And I think that's what was so exciting about the role of women in the workplace during wartime. Was the first time where they were really recruited into defense industries, the aircraft industry, and then these women only got paid half of what their male counterparts were being paid, but they took on incredibly challenging jobs like welding and drafting architectural designs for the aircraft. I just have so much admiration for the women who became the real Rosie the Riveters.
As they did all those roles, but they didn't get credit for them.
Oh, no. As soon as the war was over, it was go back to your kitchen, become the subservient wife again.
Yes, I think once women had had that taste of financial freedom and independence, they didn't want to leave the workforce and go back to that previous role of being the housewife.
My favorite character in the book was Iris.
Oh, great.
I thought she was amazing. I would want to be Iris.
Yes, thank you. I know. I'm so drawn to that era too. Researching the Zigfield Follies, I loved reading about the costumes and the stage design, and travel back in time and go to a Gatsby party or go to a performance to see the Zigfield Follies.
The lack of costumes, that really surprised me, because my picture of the Zigfield girls was the big feathered costume. Apparently, they wore a lot less than that.
Yes, well, each year it changed. I love these photographs from the early 1900s by a photographer, Alfred Cheney Johnston. The photographs are incredible of the Follies in 1913, and they are nude, but then draped with beaded cloth. As you go further in time, they get the big feathered headdresses. They had different rules where you could have nudity so long as it was in a tableau and not when they were dancing. So it would be like a frozen art scene where everyone
they had to stand still.
Stand still. You know, you could be a statue in the scene when topless, but you couldn't be dancing around.
The other part of this story, the missing soldiers, Ellie's father, and his second life. It wasn't shocking because I've read other stories where that actually happened. I had a friend, she found out when her father died that he had a whole family with 5 other children.
Oh my God.
In the town 50 miles away from where she lived.
Wow.
His quote unquote widow and the children all showed up for his funeral, and there she was with her mother, and they didn't know they existed.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, that must have been such a shock. No, what made me think of it when I was doing research on missing aircraft that were discovered much later, I read a book called Vanished, and it was about a plane that went down in the Pacific Theater, reading the accounts of these family members because they wanted so badly to believe that the servicemen were still alive without closure. They're just given this missing in action and no one recovered the plane or the bodies. So then rumors started, and one of the people in the book interviewed was a child when this was going on, and he kept hearing rumors that his dad was alive, but just like you said, with a second family in California. And that's what gave me the idea of, first you have this pain of the ambiguous loss where you don't have closure for your loved one, and then you can spin stories out of that, wanting them to be alive, and then thinking, well, if they are alive, why aren't they contacting me? Are they in hiding? Are they taking on a new identity?
But then Ellie's mother apparently knew about this, or that's why she was so angry.
Yeah, I try to think, what would a woman with her mindset, she doesn't believe in divorce at all, so I thought, she might have realized it was going on, but just sort of bear it. Unfortunately, take it out on her daughter, her own marital problems. I was trying to dive into the ideas of generational trauma and ambiguous loss, and read some really interesting articles by Dr. Pauline Boss, who coined the term when she was interviewing family members of airmen who'd gone missing in the Vietnam War. And so it was the first time of exploring this very individual grief where there's no closure and no burial, the rituals that we do in society to really say goodbye, be able to move forward.
Whenever we interview somebody who's written something historical, I'm always curious about how you research. We've talked to people who use newspapers from the past to get a sense of what they wore and what they shopped for. And what is your technique?
You can't be old enough to remember the 40s.
There's wealth of information online, on YouTube. I love reading the digital newspaper archives. So many newspapers are online now. You can read newspaper articles from the 40s or from the 20s and get a sense of what was going on. Looking at old advertising, seeing how it was marketed towards women. And then just reading books, reading accounts that were told from family members of servicemen who were alive in the 40s, reading lots of letters, lots of love letters and letters sent home during the wars. Just as much source material as I could get my hands on. I like to do all the research beforehand, where I'll just fill up at least 3 notebooks, handwritten notes, to get a sense of the time period. I love historic newspapers. A lot of them are scanned online, but also I read an oral history for this one because it's the first book I've set in New York. So I read a book called You Must Remember This, and it was an oral history of New York recorded between the late 1800s and the 1920s of every borough. So I could really get an understanding of the different dialects, like the different socioeconomic demographics of what ethnicities, find out that Hell's Kitchen was Irish and the Lower East Side was Jewish, things where I really wanted to learn how would this neighborhood in particular, how would someone who's from there have spoken back in the 1920s and what would have existed there. And then watching old YouTube footage like of the L train and just trying to pore over old maps to figure out how the transportation would have been. So you can really go deep. And of course, the clothes are so fun too. I always go on Pinterest to look at the clothing from the era. Sometimes I make a fun Pinterest board.
It definitely sounds like you did not look at the research as too much work. It sounded like you really enjoyed it.
Yeah, I think as long as you choose a time period that you're excited about, anyone who writes historical fiction has to enjoy the research. Otherwise, you've picked something that if it's not an era that you want to go deep into, then you should probably pick a new topic.
The group that Iris goes to of old Zigfield Folly girls, was that an actual agency?
It is, yes. The Zigfield Club is actually still an agency in New York. And so it was started by Zigfield's wife, Billie Burke, who played Glinda the Good Witch in Wizard of Oz. When it first started out, when they visit, it was meant for helping Zigfield girls who were down on their luck because, like it says in the book, they didn't have any other job training. You know, they'd started on the stage really young as dancers and singers, but then when they couldn't keep working in that field in their old age, they didn't have typing skills or anything like that. But now it has changed its focus by empowering women who are in musical theater today. They do advocacy and mentoring programs, and they have a Billie Burke Zigfield Award for female composers. So yeah, just keeping the theater alive. And I loved reading their memoirs. I think Doris Eaton Travis was possibly the oldest Zigfield Follies dancer. I think she died, she was 106. So she gave some amazing interviews in the New York Times, and I was able to read some of what she wrote. But in the 90s, when the last of these original Follies dancers were still alive, I think they did honor them at the New Amsterdam Theater when it reopened.
That's amazing that that's still going on, the part about the murder. You waited on that one. That was like 2/3 into the book. It was well worth waiting for. It was very well done.
Thank you.
Is this going to be a continuing story with Ellie, or are you going to continue her story?
No, I often get asked that, but each book that I've written has been a standalone with different characters in a different time period. I've never been interested in writing a sequel, but I actually had a friend text me after she finished it and say, "Tell me you're continuing Ellie's story." I really enjoy hearing from readers when they connect with the character and want to hear more about that character. But
yeah, she becoming a reporter and she's on her way.
Well, speaking of that, what is next for Meredith?
The book that I'm working on now is set in the late 1800s in San Quentin prison, when there are actually women in the prison as well as men. based on true accounts of some of the women in San Quentin in the 1890s. And then the other story, because I always like doing a dual narrative, is going to be set during the 70s when San Francisco was going through a lot of urban renewal, where a lot of historic neighborhoods were being destroyed. And so there's a photographer who's documenting what's going on. And then she finds the mugshot of an Irish